What's up? I started the recording before, but I had to close the windows because there's like it's summertime and there's people playing football and dogs barking and stuff outside, so I couldn't really focus, and my nose itch. So I haven't done. I think this is my third video for this channel. I'm not sure. It was a really long time ago I did a video, so I thought, because I have a Swedish channel as well, and usually I just like start ranting in Swedish and then I think like, oh well, maybe I should have done this in English, and then I don't want to try, because this is just like mind, like thought orgasms that comes out like this, not much pre-planned, maybe like a little bit of like, oh, I heard about this idea and I want to explore it by thinking aloud. So this, like the concept of this channel is for me to like think through certain ideas, or like explore my own mind, and if I have like some concepts, I want to see how I like I want to record my own thought process while trying to puzzle things together, and then maybe someone out there might enjoy it. They can become quite long and quite diffuse and ranty and abstract, and yeah, but it's not my absolute opinions on any topic, but it's more like ideas popping up, and then maybe like a counter idea, or if I come up with this idea, or this idea might, like, it's like a tree growing and then there's branches and then there's like fruits and all kinds of bullshit. So this, just a couple of days ago I heard two people talking about how the sort of transition from an oral tradition to like a text-based learning mode of obtaining knowledge has changed the culture and they talked it in a certain sense, and my mind went like all these different places, and how, because I'm sort of like trying to navigate, I'm interested in how like narcissism, autism, ADHD, trauma, media, social media, how our culture has, like how all these things are sort of like stemming from a shift in the culture and technology, and like the written word is kind of technology, but also so not to like just vomit out like short bursts of ideas that you might not be able to, like, oh, how does that fit with this, like I'm thinking like the way this person described it, and he's a Swedish guy who's called Ashkan, or he's not Swedish, but he's an immigrant, so he's sort of Swedish. And what? No, thank you. But he talks about how the world was oral, and in oral tradition, or in like auditory, in the auditory sense, it's not linear in the way that it's more omnidirectional, and you're the center, so you hear things and they come in, and they might come in at like in time, but they're coming from different directions and different, like, you don't sort the audio in terms of when it comes in. It's sort of like just this like it's just this flow of information. So it's, in a sense, you could say it's more feminine based because it's flowing, and it's not concretized. It's more just like floating around. So we had all these, like, for from the beginning of humanity up until a point, we had this oral tradition of telling stories, and the stories are sort of linear, but there's the importance is that the meaning is conveyed. So if you can tell the story, if you understand the meaning of the story, you tell it in a way that's best suited to bring out the meaning of the story. So we're sort of like, and this also had to happen with the minimum of 2 people present. So one person tells the other person a story, or you had like the priest, or the like the leader of the clan, or whatever you want to, like, there's a group of people, and then there's one people who's speaking the narrative to the group, and then the group has this collective narrative that's informed into them by the story that one person, or like, we had this, like, the stories construct the narrative that they then live in. So it's kind of like language was the creation of the simulation that then when the written language comes along, then you can sort of like write down the stories, and then they become more manifest, more permanent, more materialized, because then they can travel, and then they can spread out, and not just travel by audio. Now you have another format that's more concrete. And then, so at first they wrote down the stories so they could be like retold and become more precise. but that also meant that the meaning might have been slightly obscured because there's no intelligence in the written word in terms of, I can't remember because I heard this a little while ago as well, that there was a big, I think it was like a big issue that when the printing press came and you could mass produce Bibles, every Christian person could take their own Bible into like isolation and then read the Bible, and then everyone who reads the Bible will interpret the words through their like through their lens of who they are, who they bring to the page. So two people will read a single page of the Bible in two different ways. They might overlap in like 90%, or they might overlap in 10%. It depends on who reads it and what they bring to the page. So just by the printing press in that sense, and people having access to their own Bible, to the Bible, I wonder what the word own means in that context. But to the Bible, they can have a Bible in isolation and read it and think they get it, or they got the meaning that was put there by the hand that wrote it initially. And if you like, the cool thing is that if you think about like these stories, that's sort of like they've come from observation, distillation, and sort of like pattern seeking, pattern finding, and then like, oh, there's a pattern, there's a pattern, there's a pattern, there's a pattern. These patterns seem to have a similar structure, or there's an overarching pattern that governs all these inferior patterns. Let's create a narrative around that pattern and put it in this book, so that every time someone reads this story, they will sort of start to see how all these patterns are sort of brought into this higher pattern, let's say. And but if you like give this book to like a 5-year-old who just started to read, they will start projecting their own patterns into the story, and they will come to like conclusions because they project their mind into the story. But you could speculate that the stories are written in such a profound way over like thousands of years, distilled into these like exact words. That's why translations tend to be interpretations, and they bring the present and the present culture and the present ideologies into the text if you're not really, well, like, even if you're really, really super careful about not projecting into the text while translating it, you probably will to some extent. But so, well, the idea is like these stories have been gathered through some kind of like the intelligence of humanity is this pattern seeking thing, let's call it thing, that sees these patterns and then they distill it and they distill it and they distill it into these, like, imagine the Bible being the distilled patterns of the universe into a book of about, like, say, I don't know, 1,200 pages or whatever. And can you imagine that every pattern in the universe is, you can find it in the book if you have the ability to read. And when I say the ability to read, I mean the ability to be still. So now I'm trying to bring all these ideas together. So we had the oral traditions, and then we had, so that the oral traditions was like pattern gathering and pattern synthesis and distilling down, and then because trying to every generation, imagine in the past as well, you might, I don't know how old people actually got to be, because it's sort of speculation that if you don't have books and written language to put down information into, you have to like speak it into the next generation, otherwise it will be lost. So that's like a problem with the oral tradition, that if you don't speak it and if it doesn't stick, it's gone forever. Well, it's not gone forever, but it's like it's still in the grander patterns, but then it might take a few thousand years to distill it down into these extraordinary stories that we can sort of communicate effectively without having to sort of I'm not sure how to like like say the Joseph Campbell monomyth is a synthesis of all these grand narratives that he found a pattern in, that he called the monomyth, and it's like 12, is it 12 steps to Jordan Peterson? No, but it's like the Call to Adventure, and then it's the Dark Night of the Soul, and then it's like all these, like the Return Home. And so we've taken the oral tradition and put it on paper, which was a participatory thing, or a participatory way of holding together the community, and it's sort of like this, like these narratives create the world in which everyone lives. So it's sort of like the simulation of reality. So it's like the lens which you then look at the world through. And I've realized that most people they can't grasp that. And I guess if it's taken me a few years to sort of pierce the veil and sort of see beyond the matrix, because in a way the Bible is a sort of a matrix, or a map that you view the world through, or like you watch the world and then you go to the map and like you look for the meaning in the Bible. Like, what does this mean? There's a person telling me this. Oh, that reminds me of this story in the Bible, and that's the meaning is this, to not do this, or to show courage in the face of blah blah blah. So it was participatory, and then it's sort of like you can't get rid of the hierarchy in that either, because you sort of need someone who authors, who has the authority that decides which narratives the collective should shall follow. But that role is given by the collective to that person. It's usually, I think it wasn't like that person fought to be the king. The role of the king was a sacrifice to the people. I think it's sort of a romanticized or a demonized image that kingship is this like, oh, I wish I was king, then I could do anything, and I would be like free. And it's like, the responsibility of a king, if the people says like, you are to lead us, and if you lead us wrong, we'll fucking take your head. that's not super pleasant. But okay, so going back to say we had this oral tradition, we had this communal like life, and we had most of the narrative in our heads was shared. So our identity was maybe, say, 95% the same. We were all like, we all shared 95% of the narrative structure of our simulation, let's call it that. We could call it reality, not the world. 95% of how we perceive the world was shared. So then we had the written word, and then we had there was just a select few who could read, who could profess the written word. But then we had a printing press, and then through technology and through more and more like resources and efficiency, everyone could start to read, like everyone could learn how to read, and then we could learn how to write, and then we could like start to formulate our own narratives and ideas and put them into little, like write it down, and we could go into our own little spaces and read, and that's profound, because then something happens. Instead of everyone sharing 95% of the world, understanding each other, the Tower of Babel is happening. Technology is breaking reality or breaking the world apart. So now I might share, well, today, if we're going to the extreme, I might share like that's difficult. Well, even if it's 50%, if I share 50% of the world with my neighbors, that's like 50% is like alien. So if I sit and talk to a neighbor and they're 50% alien to me, like 50% of their narratives, 50% of their thoughts and ideas, and like I can't understand it, because I haven't read, I haven't processed, I haven't like watched the same media as them. So what they're talking about is another language, another world of reality, of existence, of perception. And so we had like the oral tradition, then we had the written word, then we had radio, then we had television, then we had like cinema, then we had the internet. And all these like technologies. And now we have gaming. So we create simulations of worlds on a screen, and then we sort of sit, and like social media is kind of like for guys it's like playing war, like Call of Duty. You play with other people in a simulation and you enact war. Social media, you play with other people in a simulation called Twitter or Facebook, and you enact war. It's the fucking same thing, but it's one is masculine war, the other is feminine war. It's war. It's war of narratives. It's war of ideas. It's war of the like the masculine war is the physical war of territory, of like the world out there. The feminine is the psyche, the internal landscape. And there's a war trying to like go back to, or not go back to, but in the sense that the way I spoke about oral traditions, that we sort of have this collective narrative and reality and world view. There's a war for this space. So they're trying to entertain, introject their narrative into your mind, so you will adhere to this story, this narrative, this view, this perspective. And when I say they, who are they? Those inclined to desire power, and usually those people are traumatized, narcissistic, atheistic, because they don't recognize the like they're driven by their own ego. So atheistic in the sense that they don't see the patterns, because they're only projecting. They only want to take, or when I say it's more like they only want to further themselves, extend themselves out into the world. So they want to infect people with them, just like Agent Smith in The Matrix. He wants to make everyone Agent Smith, and that's the narcissist in this sense. They want their narrative to be your narrative in the way that you will make them your God, I think. And that's based in trauma, and I think it's like it's the beginning of that was the book, in that sense that before the written word and the printing press and the book, everyone had to collectively grow up, and there was like cohesion. And then as soon as you could take information, go into isolation and process it by yourself without a mentor, without a guide, without a guru, without a parent, without a authority figure, the ego could run the show in a way. So you could sort of individualize into or rather perhaps atomize and isolate yourself from the collective. And that makes if everyone does that, the collective is now like the Tower of Babel. There's no more tower because everyone speaks their own language. I can, like, I'm old enough to remember when I was younger, we watched television and we watched a show in the evening, and then we talked about that specific show. Everyone talked about that specific show in school. So it was, even if I sat in front of my screen at home watching something, it was a collective endeavor because we talked about it afterwards. And now everyone has their own echo chamber, everyone has their own stream of information flowing on the screen, and no one, like when you talk to someone else, they haven't seen it and they don't know what that is and they can't, so you can't really communicate with another person about something because you don't share the same coordinates in like how the patterns of the world is seen. And this is sort of like the world has broken, and that's like God is dead, because God was this thing that held together humanity. So in a way, the oral tradition was where God lived, and now it's sort of like we have all these, everyone is their own atomized God. They're a fragmented God. And it's like, how do we bring about, or do we want to bring about, this collective again, or do we enjoy being in solitude, or do we feel alone? Because most of the time I quite enjoy being by myself, like in solitude, but then other times I can feel really alone and feel like, oh, I wish I had someone who understands me, because oftentimes I feel completely misunderstood, and that's probably because I consume a lot of information that no one else in my reality, in this world out here, they don't consume this information, but it's like, the way I see it, it's controlling them, or maybe it's controlling me. I don't know. It's strange, because it's like, this is how much is projection and how much is, and this goes back to the narcissistic nature of like being this atomized consciousness inside this flesh suit. So it's interesting how we're kind of like, let's say in the Matrix we had the world that Neo lives in at the beginning, and then it's sort of like wake up, and then he wakes up and jumps into this other, so he lives in this kind of atomized state where he sits in front of his computer, and like his life is mainly in front of a screen, and then he unplugs and goes into this other world where he's on this Nebuchadnezzar, I can't pronounce it, Nebuchadnezzar, I don't know, but that's sort of like the ship, and that's where his community becomes. So there's a group of people with the same narrative. They have the same worldview. And then he comes to, what's it called? Zion. Where there's this, like, group, like, big community of people who seems to have the same, like, it's sort of like moving back to this place where oral tradition is the main source of living, because you don't see much reading, you don't see many screens, there's only these people who lives in harmony, and it's kind of hedonistic, and then there's technology, that's the evil. So it's like you've been trapped in the screen, and now you've gone back to the people, and now you have to fight the technology, like the Baphomet of information. Well, not a Baphomet. Well, I guess that was my thoughts for today.